will notice that there are some differences between this meeting of this advanced club and a regular Toastmasters meeting. And those differences are mainly related to the focus of this club, which is evaluation. And I think you're going to enjoy both the educational presentations today and the way that the evaluations work. I'd like to start the meeting by introducing our meeting functionaries, starting with our timer, Mark Johnson.
Hello, I'm Mark Johnson. I will be your timer today. I will flash up different backgrounds. The first one will be green. Depending on the length of the speech, a 5 to 7 minute speech, you'll have green at 5, you'll have yellow at 6, and red at 7. And I will be timing all that. Thank you.
Okay. And Mark, for your information, Vicki Leuba's presentation is 20 to 25 minutes.
Okay, great, because I didn't have that info.
Yep. Our second functionary is Debra, who is doing the recording this morning. And Debra, I'm assuming you're going to make the link available to people later on, like our guests.
Yeah, I didn't do the introduction piece. I started recording when you started as Toastmaster, and I'll have that available.
Okay, thank you very much, Debra. Our general evaluator today is Robert. And so there you are. Okay, go ahead, Robert. Tell us what you're going to be doing today.
Well, today I'm going to look at the overall meeting, the presentation that everyone does, and I will call for the timer reports and also do evaluations of the evaluators. We have 4 evaluators. Okay. I'll do that about 15 minutes after 11.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. Now, to start off with the actual speech evaluators, we have 4 of them. Our audio evaluator is Vicki, and Vicki, you already talked a little bit about that. Do you have anything more you want to add to that? Where'd she go? Oh. It appears that Vicki is in suspended animation right now, so let's move on to our second evaluator, our visual evaluator.
Nope, I think I explained what my role is.
Okay, thank you. Now, our visual evaluator today is Ritva Kinzel. So Ritva, could you tell us your function, please?
Thank you, Mr. General Evaluator. I will be looking at the visual only. In fact, I just texted our Debra, I'm sorry, to have this recorded because I'm going to turn off my volume, so I will not listen to the words at all. I will focus on the physical presentation, including things such as presence on Zoom video screen, how she uses the screen, eye contact, body language, whether or not she uses, or neither one of our speakers uses the props, gestures. So all this needs to fit into the video screen, Mr. General Evaluator.
Okay, thank you, Rita. Our content evaluator today is Mike Anthony. So Mike, could you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing, please?
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Welcome all guests. Aren't on screen and only on phone. I have Valentine hearts in my background as an added perk to my evaluation. If you should choose to join the contests that are coming up, I will deliver 2 pounds of Valentine heart candy to your home as an added incentive to being a contestant in our upcoming speech contests. As your content evaluator today, I will be evaluating the content from beginning to end, how the opening coincides with the closing, the summary. Looking forward to a fantastic meeting, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Mike. And finally, our 4th evaluator is our manual evaluator, Mark Johnson. So Mark, could you tell us what you're going to be doing, please?
Yes, I will, Lloyd. I am going to be doing the manual evaluation, which I have been sent 2 evaluation forms. I will go over them, and they are from Toastmasters. They will talk about how the speaker presented things and a series of other questions and scales of how they did. And I will be doing that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And for our guests, these 4 evaluators will be evaluating both speeches today.
Yep.
And obviously, one at a time, though. Now, for speaker number 1, our speaker today is Vicki Leuba, and she is a guest. And as she mentioned earlier, she's a member of the other advanced club in the area, the faculty club. For her speech today, which is Enhancing Evaluations, she says in her introduction, is evaluation important for a successful Toastmasters meeting? Maybe this factoid is an indication. There are 290 responses to a search for the term evaluation on the TI website. When are you evaluated? In reality, it's during almost every interpersonal reaction or interaction that you have at job interviews or performance reviews, during family discussions, and sometimes at Toastmasters meetings. We're often given some feedback during a performance review and routinely at Toastmasters meetings. At other times, we're simply judged. At Toastmasters, we get feedback we can use to improve our performance in the club setting and in our lives outside the club. Our speaker today is a DTM and a member of 2 clubs. She's been a lamplighter since January of 2009 and is a charter member of the faculty club, the other advanced club in District 9. Her goals today is to share with you a Toastmasters Club Officer Training module and to improve her online presentations. Our club officer training today focuses on making evaluations more effective. Please help me welcome Vicki Leuba for her presentation, Enhancing Evaluations. Vicki.
Thank you, Lloyd. It was a little longer than I anticipated it was going to be when I wrote it. Speaking is always slower than writing. Have you ever had an evaluation that left you feeling less than motivated? I've had a few of those. I've had them both in job situations. I think I'm still had them in job situations and in my personal life. It's been problematic for me over the years to deal with those evaluations that were more eviscerating than effective. They were effective in driving me away. And I'm afraid that Toastmasters has on occasion experienced the same thing, where evaluation has left someone feeling less than enhanced, less than valued. So I'm hoping today that I can provide you some tips and tricks, some advice on how to provide an evaluation that enhances not only the member you're evaluating, yourself and your audience. Let's dig in and see how we can enhance our evaluations. If there's time at the end of this session, which I'm doubting, I'll share with you a tool for dealing with those eviscerating experiences that you may have had or will have in the future. I'm going to share my screen. Only the host tells me that it's disabled and I can't. So I'm going to
do it now. You can do it now, Vicki. Sorry.
Thanks, Debra. I'm going to share this screen with you and we'll go through the training slides. This training is designed to be an hour long and we only have 25 minutes today to get through an hour's worth of material. So I'm going to abbreviate, eliminate, and manage this training the best I can in the next 20 minutes. If you're evaluating, whenever you're evaluating, whoever you're evaluating, the first thing you need to do, absolutely the first thing you need to do when you are the evaluator is check your intention. If you are receiving the evaluation, you also need to check your intention. And your intention in evaluation is to provide helpful, constructive feedback. Your intention as the receiver of that evaluation is to hear that feedback with an open mind and digest it. See if it's useful to you. See if there's a way you can incorporate it in your work. As an audience member, when you hear an evaluation, you can find some secret sauce in it, maybe. You can see where that person's evaluation can really help you improve your performance. Evaluations have that universal component, and we can all learn from them. I'm going to skip some of the parts of this presentation, and I have to get back to it. Uh-oh, now I'm stuck. There we go. Not stuck, unstuck. Dealing with this format is new to all of us, and I am still learning, and I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to learn, but forgive me when I hit one of those minor obstacles. A good evaluation deals with all of these pieces. I'm going to spend some time today focusing primarily on the feedback versus advice, the criteria, and the effective coaching. Overcoming potential obstacles, there are always many of them. You need to think about what obstacles you might be encountering when you're beginning to prepare for an evaluation. Do you know the person? Have you had good interactions with them? There are many things that can influence your attitude when you go into an evaluation. Those can become obstacles, especially if you're not remembering that your intention is to provide constructive and helpful criticism to your speaker. These are the 4 things that this module consists of. As I say, we're going to breeze through a lot of them. So the objectives of this module are similar to the objectives of every training module. They're to give you some quality information that you can use in your work in Toastmasters and in your life. When we're done, these are the things that the module expects you'll be able to do. What's the importance of feedback? How is the evaluation based on manual objectives? And this was a little bit of a problem for a training because there is no manual evaluation for this training. There is simply a training evaluation. You identify the potential obstacles you're going to have, and one of mine is not being in person because I really prefer to present in person. And then how to use the 4 steps of effective coaching to improve your evaluations and the overall experience in your club. So I'm going to talk now about evaluations, and this is just an example of 2 live meetings. I don't have a good picture of an evaluation that's been done remotely, but that's how we're doing them now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and talk about the evaluations in general. A good speech evaluation is a multi-step process, and it begins before the meeting. A good speech evaluation is started by reading the project and understanding the motivation and the desires of your speaker and responding to those. So if I tell you that I want to be evaluated on using the remote virtual environment, that's where you would focus your evaluation. It's a conversation that should or often begins before the meeting and can continue after the meeting. Most people focus all their efforts at the meeting, and that's an important component, but it's not the only one. So before the meeting, you read the objectives and you talk to the speaker. During the meeting, your job is to listen really closely and be conscious again that you are helping this person improve their performance. Each speech in a Pathways project has an evaluation form, and we'll look at those in a minute. I thought about starting this by saying, okay, you've seen the evaluation forms. You know that there's a scale from 1 to 5. When you think about your evaluations of other people, do you rate your evaluations as a 5? Or do you rate those evaluations as a 3? I have to admit that I've been rating mine as a 3. They've gotten pretty mediocre lately. So how do you top it up? How do you enhance each evaluation? During the meeting, we know you listen to the presentation and you prepare your oral response, and then you also prepare a written response and you fill out the evaluation form. You can't and shouldn't try and critique every aspect of the speech. Pick a few and be specific about those few and what's actionable in them. There are often universal aspects of a speaker's presentation that you can call out and compliment, or minor corrections that you can call out and advise the person what might help. That's an important part of this process, is giving people not only the feedback of what they did well and what they did poorly, but giving them some suggestions about how they might improve. So let's go back and move on with this presentation, if I can figure out how to do this time. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. There we go. When you do this, there's a whole series of opportunities at the bottom of the screen to change your slide. I'm using a second screen for me, and that makes it a little more complex. But this slide, I think, is the most important one in this whole presentation. No Toastmasters Club is fulfilling its obligation to its members unless it brings them the maximum of training in the art of constructive criticism. And that's the critical point, is it's constructive criticism. It's not to say you did a great job. Doesn't tell you much. Great has a lot of room. So how can you improve that, your language, so that you're actually giving people some feedback that's useful to them? You've finished your general evaluation, you've given the oral, and then after the meeting, you have the opportunity to speak again to the evaluator. And the reason that's particularly important is that as evaluators, we have an opportunity to influence people heavily, and we need to use that opportunity wisely. So what's the difference between feedback and advice? And this is where this module spends a considerable amount of time, and we're going to move pretty quickly through it. When you are giving feedback, it's I statements. I noticed you had your hands in your pockets. I noticed you weren't making eye contact, or you were making eye contact with only a few people. I know eye contact is difficult. You might try making eye contact with just one or two people in the room. You want to try difficult eye contact. Remember, you're looking at a camera, not at people. But that eye contact is particularly important if you want to make a connection with your audience. Those are the kinds of evaluation statements that are helpful to people. They tell you why it's important. They tell you how you might use it. I use a piece of red tape on my camera, so I remember to look up there every once in a while. That's universal feedback. The specific feedback is, why do you smack your lips? That's pretty specific. It's also can be pretty hurtful. It's not feedback that people don't need to hear, but it's feedback that you might want to say for after the meeting in a private context, so that your evaluation is helpful to everyone in the room and hurtful to no one. Whereas if you make a statement like, why do you slap your lips in public, it can be very, very hurtful. I encourage you to think about using those I statements when you're making your evaluation, and to think about what's universal improvement that can be done. So that's more or less the difference between feedback and advice. You shouldn't smack your lips. That's the advice. The feedback is, best saved for after the meeting. So we can cover the basics of the evaluation in the club meeting. And the intention is to validate the speaker, give them a couple of areas, not a bunch, but a couple of areas where they can improve, and then encourage them to continue to grow and come back and continue to learn. You want to leave the presenter motivated to take on the next step in their growth, in their project. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but it can be done. And I am where am I? There I am. My pointer keeps disappearing on me. I'm sorry. That feedback loop and that advice loop is particularly important. There's an exercise here about I had difficulty hearing you. That's a perfectly adequate feedback statement. That's me. I may have a hearing problem. You should improve your eye contact. That's advice. The advice is I had difficulty connecting with you. That's the feedback. I had difficulty connecting with you because you weren't looking at anyone in the room. You were looking at your feet. Maybe that part is saved for feedback after the meeting. You use different tones throughout your speech. That's interesting, but I heard a lot of vocal variety might be more helpful. If there's a place for improvement, you might try shorter pauses. That's a place for improvement. I find a pause is really helpful when I'm trying to organize my thinking. Sometimes they get a little long. Think about the tone of what you're saying and what you want to leave that speaker with, which is encouragement. These are the evaluation criteria and the evaluation forms. And as I said, they're different depending on the project you're working on. It's critical to understand the objectives of the project if you want to provide a superb evaluation. And each evaluation form has space for all of that information. They are fillable online. You don't have to print them out. You don't have to be person to person. There are some tricks. There is a tutorial online for how to use these forms as a fillable form without ever printing it out and getting it to the speaker. I would suggest that you spend a little time looking at that tutorial online. There's a lot to be learned from just reading the evaluation forms prior to your meetings. Now, the evaluation criteria are pretty well understood. They're very specific, much more specific in Pathways than they were in our legacy program. And they can be really, really helpful to the speaker. These evaluations are critical to the improvement and the movement through our path. Overcoming the potential arguments or obstacles. I told you I was going to kind of race on this, and I am. There are obstacles that are personal. There are obstacles that are physical. There are obstacles that are universal, like our dealing with COVID. That's a pretty big obstacle these days. Think about the obstacles that you might have within your club and within a specific evaluation. Maybe you're evaluating, and this has happened to me. I evaluated a person once who was giving a speech on water management. Well, I was the water manager for 30 years. I kind of knew the subject. I could have eviscerated that person for all the errors they made. That wasn't the point. The point was not to evaluate the content. The point is to evaluate the presentation. Did they do a good job of presenting bad information? Yeah, they did a great job. After the meeting, I could say, hey, you know, that's really not the way it works, and save them the embarrassment of having a 30-year professional bring them down to size in public. It's totally unnecessary. Remember, there are obstacles and they can look like all kinds of advantages, but your purpose is to help people grow in their development. So that overcoming obstacles piece, just that they're individual, they're unique in every situation. So I wanted to spend a little time here because I think this is where the evaluation goes from being adequate to being enhanced. And that's when you identify with your speaker those goals or their areas for improvement that they want to work on. You can help that speaker by defining before and after in your evaluation some strategies to reach those goals. Maybe it's putting that piece of red tape on their camera. You can establish a timeline with them that says, well, let's see if in a month you've gotten this piece down so that you're using bigger gestures and you're making a higher impact during your speech, where you've gotten a little more comfortable with being in front of an audience. You establish that timeline and you always follow up. And I think that's one place where all of people of my evaluations, I get an evaluation in a meeting, that's the end of it. Nobody ever says, well, you know, a month ago, I noticed you were doing this and I noticed now you're not. That's a real opportunity to give somebody some kudos. It's a little pat on the back that can really help people grow and improve. So those areas for effective coaching where you can really help people grow more than the simple evaluation, where you're serving more as a coach or a mentor. If the person has a mentor, if you're evaluating a Toastmaster who has a mentor, talk to their mentor, not only to them, and say to the mentor, what are you guys working on? Or are you aware of anything they're particularly sensitive about, so you don't cross into an area that might make them uncomfortable? Learn as much about your speaker as you can, just the same way you would learn about your audience before you speak. And remember to follow up. This is an example of how that technique might work. This is the clean way of saying your eye contact was poor. I noticed you were averting your eyes from the audience. And we've all seen that happen when somebody gets nervous. One technique I've tried, that's that I statement again. And then maybe on your next speech, you might try that technique. And then on the next speech, Susie really does try that technique, and you notice, and you say, great job after the meeting. You evaluated her 2 months ago, but you're following up, not as her formal evaluator, but as her Toastmaster, whisperer. And a whisperer Toastmaster works on the evaluation continually. It is a process, not a project. This is one of the lessons that I got out of this module that I really do appreciate. So again, we look at all these pieces. That's the identifying statement. That's the technique development, the strategy. That's the example or the encouragement, and that's the follow-up. It's always a good idea to use all 4 of those steps if you want your Toastmasters compatriots to become better speakers and better evaluators. This is the scenario that they want you to practice. And if I had thought about this seriously and remembered that I can break groups into different rooms, I would send you off into different rooms to work together to discuss this. But we have a few minutes, exactly 5, I think. So does anybody have any suggestions for how you might continue with this really good opening I statement?
Vicki, I think we're not seeing your screen.
Uh-oh, I stopped. I didn't. Why am I stuck? No, that's not it.
Yeah, you have to reshare again.
Yeah, well, I have a little issue with that, I admit. Okay. I'm gonna take this. Have you got the screen now?
No, but maybe you want to just read the statement and then,
Well, now you should have it, right? Have I
yes,
got it? Yeah,
yes.
okay. So this is the example, and I apologize for that. That the idea is you give them the feedback, you give them one strategy that they might use, develop a technique, you encourage them to give it a try, and then you follow up later. And then this is the last, okay, this is the practice scenario. And I apologize if I were doing this in person, we would be split into groups and you'd have a piece of paper and you'd be chatting amongst yourselves about how do you follow this up? It's a pretty good I statement to start out with. What do you think might be the follow-up statements that would give you a strategy? I was told when I started Toastmasters that it's best to use the ready position when you're speaking, which means you keep your hands at your side, you plant your feet on the floor, you pretend you're a tree. And then when you want to make a point, your hands come out. They're magnets. You might try a little bit more gesturing in your next speech. Think about a time when a gesture would be really powerful. And a month later, you might say to the person, you know, your gestures have really come a long way. I really appreciate the fact that you heard me and you took that advice. Think about giving not only the feedback, but that helpful follow-up that says, these are strategies that have worked for me. Remember, you're evaluating the presentation, not the speaker. If you want your evaluations to go from being effective to being enhanced to being excellent, you need to practice. And you need to keep in mind that your intention, always your intention, is to help people improve. Fellow Toastmasters.
Thank you, Vicki. Mr. Timer, could we have about 2 minutes for the evaluators to finish their notes? Mark, can you hear me? Mark, I think you're muted.
I muted over here. I muted twice.
Okay,
I got it. Yep.
okay, thank you.
Yep. Thirty seconds. 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Mhm.
And now for our second speaker. And Mark, this second speech is a 5 to 7.
5 to 7. Got it.
Okay. Many of us join Toastmasters to improve our speaking skills, or so we tell ourselves. But when our name pops up on the Vice President of Education's weekly schedule to deliver a speech at the next meeting, we sometimes panic or balk because we can't think of anything to speak about. Our next speaker is here with some tips to help you discover ideas which will help you craft a solid speech. For the researching and presenting project in level 1 of her persuasive influence path, she will offer ideas to make your whole presentation a winner. Please join me in putting your happy hands together for District 9 Director Debra Kroon and her speech, Whatever Will I Say? Whatever Will I Say?
Thank you, Lloyd. How do you decide how to craft a speech? Do you come up with a catchy title that you really like, and then you create a speech out of whole cloth, so to say? Or do you stumble across a topic that you're interested in, you start researching it, and then you realize, hey, this will make a really good speech? Or do you do nothing because you know everything and you just realize you're supposed to speak tomorrow and you don't worry about it? Oh, I know lots of stuff. I'll just start talking on this topic, and I hope I manage to string it together, and I hope I manage to stick within the time frame, and I hope nobody will notice. Well, guess what? They will notice if you haven't prepared properly. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome guests. Today, I want to try and give you some tips. I'm going to give you some tips on how to craft a speech. Now, there are many, many ideas and suggestions out there. All you have to do is Google it, type it into your search engine, how to craft a speech, how to find a topic, and a gazillion items will pop up. You go to the Toastmasters International website itself and use their search engine, and you'll find a plethora of topics on how to craft a speech. In fact, I stumbled across one practicing for this speech, or researching it, by Judith Krauthammer, that in the April 2019 edition of the Communication blog on 5 easy ways to craft a speech. So let's get into this. First off, how do you come up with a topic? How do you want to be interesting to your audience? Well, in 2010, I was attending the district conference down in Richland, and Jim Keyes, the 2003 world champion of public speaking, was our keynote. I attended his workshop on crafting speeches, and I asked him the question, but how do you find something interesting to talk about? And he said something profound to me that has stayed with me ever since, and that is, if you want to be an interesting speaker, you have to lead an interesting life. Whoa, that was really earth-shattering for me, but it was also eye-opening because I realized I did lead an interesting life, maybe not in a good way sometimes, but it was interesting. But let's get real here. Unless you've been living under a rock, you too have led an interesting life, and a life that you could use to inform your audience. You've had jobs, you've had careers, you've had families, either by choice or by chance. You have hobbies and interests, and we want to hear about those. They may be mundane to you, but put your spin on it and your delivery to it, and it will be exciting for us. For example, I'm a master gardener in my other life. A few years ago, an interesting stink bug showed up in the United States, the brown marmorated stink bug. Now, this is causing quite dismay around the world indeed, because it is around the world, but in the United States, because this is a vicious insect that has no natural predators, and there is not a food crop it will not eat. So it is a big problem for our country. I also have raised monarch butterflies. I love to talk about that. Who wouldn't like to hear about that iconic insect? One of our members knows a lot about the combustion engine, and he talks about that. What are your hobbies and your interests? Dive into those and give us a speech about that. Now, you need to remember and learn, what is your purpose of speaking? Is it to inform us? Is it to convince us? persuade us to your side, or is it a call to action? Help me save this tree or this insect or this plant, something. What is your call to action? Now, next, you need to know who your audience is. And this is important because if you're going to be given a speech on vegetable cooking, you probably want to know that your audience are cattle ranchers. Or if you want to talk about better gardening through chemicals, you want to know that your audience are organic farmers. This is important because you want to know that ahead of time before you end up with having a really bad day. Research your topic. You may think, well, I know everything about this topic. It's my life. I've been living it. But I can tell you somebody else in your audience is going to know that topic too. And they're going to maybe call you out on it, on something that you didn't get right. Use pathways in your speaking. It has hundreds of ideas and tips and resources for you to do your speech with. Just this week, I was looking at how to finish my level 3 project in one of my pathways, and I discovered that the recent work I've been doing in my district leadership fits perfectly into this level 3 project, and I'll be able to finish it next week. Know your time constraints. If your speech is 5 to 7 minutes, stick within that time frame. If you're speaking for 30 minutes, don't end at 15 and leave your audience wondering what's going on. You'll be remembered and not in a good way. Your 5 to 7 minute speech is probably about 720 words, depending on how fast you talk. Write it out, practice it, time it. If it's long, prune it until you get it right. Hone your speech. Practice, practice, practice your way to Carnegie Hall, or in Toastmasters, your way to world champion at public speaking. So there you have it. Lead an interesting life, identify your purpose, know your audience, research your topic, use pathways, watch your timing, and practice, practice, practice. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Deborah. This is typically the time where we take a break in our meeting, since we're about an hour in, and it's also, we need a couple minutes for the evaluators to finish their notes. So let's see, it is 10:57. How about we all get back here by, say, 6 minutes after 11? Does that sound okay? Okay.